we're going at all. I'm not sure.
Because it feels like you should have plane tickets by now since it's Christmas.
Well, I think he did change. Well, here's the thing. He did change our flight from Monday to tomorrow, but there's supposedly this horrible cold front moving in. You know about this?
Oh, we're supposed to get hammered
Yeah,
tomorrow.
and it's supposed to delay everything, and it's supposed to be awful, and everything's freezing over, and all planes are going to be delayed and stuff. So at this point, his family's like, actually, like, do you want to come after Christmas because you might never get here anyway?
This is why I don't understand. Look at my screen.
We'll hit refresh at the top.
Where's the refresh button?
On the left. Now hit live.
Finally.
There. All you do is hit refresh, knucklehead.
Where'd my chat go? Uh-oh. I lost my chat.
Pop out chat.
Pop out.
Where did the chat go? Oh no. Oh no.
There we go. All right, move this over here where I can see it. Who's here?
Poop out the chat.
Amanda, Nicole, Danielle, Rena, Michelle, Hannah, Lilius, Montana, Lynn, Valeria, Kelly, Nick, Janet Barney's in the house.
Ahoy,
Mary, ahoy, everyone. I like it. I like it. Hey guys. So is this this big cold front? So it's see, I've only looked at our weather and stuff. So this is like a nationwide thing that's happening.
Well, it's supposed to move down into Texas even. So that's inconvenient. Yeah.
Yeah. Like our kids are all like, we're not having school on Friday, right? Because for us tomorrow is supposed to, like, in the afternoon, the temperature's supposed to drop, and it's supposed to start, it's going to rain and then turn into snow.
Yeah.
And then like overnight, Thursday night into Friday, we're supposed to get like 8 to 10 inches of snow, and it's supposed to be like 40-mile-an-hour winds, and they're like that.
Yeah, my friend in Iowa was like, sent me an email. It was like, should I be, because she lives by herself in a house that she inherited from.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Janet, but how did you do that?
Go to view up in the top corner.
View.
Now zoom in.
Like button smash. Thanks, Porphyria. Ooh, that rolled off the tongue, Porphyria. I finally got there.
Wow. Zach just showed me how I can make the chat bigger so I can actually read it.
Yeah, so you don't have to like really try to.
Oh, nice.
I just looked at the screen. I'm like, you son of a bitch. How can you read all that?
This is going to be great. So what I'm hearing is now I'll be even more distracted when Janet is asking the questions that she is supposed to be asking me and I should be listening to.
I'm sorry.
Listen, there was no way that I was ever not going to be reading the chat while you're talking.
No, okay.
So now that we know that,
I made
it easier.
It will
great.
At least I'll be, because half of the distraction isn't just that people are talking, it's that I can't see it. So I'm like,
got it. Got it.
That one where Mike was like, none of us were in the same room. And Mike's like, you got to tell us when you check out, because he was talking to me. And while he was talking to me, he's like, all I see in the camera is I was reading something.
Satisfying.
Man.
I really got it. I got a frog in my throat today. I'm going to apologize in advance, especially to thee, Kelly. You're wonderful. Happy holidays. I couldn't even get through happy hours. Happy holidays. Happy holidays, everybody.
You'll love Zach's sweater. Currently hauling over 32,000 pounds of Hudsonville ice cream.
That sounds good. Bring it to my house.
Yeah. Are you?
Whoa.
So you're shipping from Hudsonville? That's from Michigan, just right up the road from us. By up the road, I mean about an hour and a half from us.
Yes.
They make that good ice cream.
They do.
Hudsonville factory.
Heck yeah.
They do.
Oh, all right. We didn't talk about anything.
I'm glad that everybody likes my sweater.
Yeah,
I'm the only one. Why am I the only one that's in Christmas spirit? I really am disappointed with you guys today.
I don't know, but you know what's never happened once ever?
What?
Like, it happens to you every week. Like, I like your shirt. I like it. No one has ever been like, Bob, that's like a really nice Carhartt t-shirt.
Do you not think that
never happens?
Here, listen to yourself and tell us if that is surprising.
You don't.
When I said it out loud.
I've got a good shirt.
The sad part is he had our YouTube channel up there, and there was like all the videos were up there, and I'm like, I'm wearing this shirt in 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 of those. 7 of those videos, I'm wearing the same shirt. When I was in California, so I was like getting ready to pack, and I'm like, oh shit, it's gonna be cold while I'm there. And so I grabbed like a bunch of my fall weather gear, and then about day 3, I told you, I'm like, I could be a Carhartt commercial. Didn't realize I'm wearing. Every day was wearing Carhartt jeans, a Carhartt t-shirt under a Carhartt flannel. And I didn't mean to, but everything I fucking packed was Carhartt. So that's my bad.
Great story.
Audio Man 45 was in Hudsonville earlier today. That's a new
Nicole
new
Johnson,
cheddar.
please do not lie to Bob. It's okay.
Bob, your t-shirt game is on fire.
Teresa wants to know where your unitard is. Teresa, he has to trot out that unitard once in a rare while, or it's not special.
It's definitely not special.
But you're reminding me that I don't have any like I don't have Christmas. Like I don't think I have any cute Christmas sweaters or anything. I don't know what's happened there.
No, I'm a Grinch. I
We got
my house is littered with stuff. Like, and you know what a Snoopy household we are, Bob.
Oh,
there's a lot of Christmas Snoopy out there. A lot of Christmas Snoopy going on out there.
Brandon and Janet are big Snoopers, big Snoopies.
Mm-hmm.
It's on their license plate.
It's on Brandon's license plate. Let's be clear.
It's
mostly Brandon.
Snoopy watch.
Except for we all have already met these bad boys. What's up, everybody? The Snoopy slippers are in play.
I like it.
Solar Dad says when you find a good shirt, you just buy it in all the colors. That's exactly right. I did.
I definitely do that.
He bought
one,
a gray,
a black one,
and
blue,
and a slightly different gray.
Yeah.
A different
smoky gray, dark blue,
heather gray.
navy.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Great.
We will start here in a second.
I got to be honest with you. I did not trim down the questions as much as I normally do. I realized usually what I do is I take them all. It's such a process, but I mean, I'm sure there's an easier way to do it. I usually take everything off because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something just by kind of picking and choosing. And then I cull the list of questions from my Word document, Pages document. I'm an Apple person. And I didn't really do very much of that this time because there were so many great things and a lot of them were very technical.
Oh, and I'm gonna.
I might have too many questions.
When I start rambling, I'm gonna. You're gonna have to go through it. You're gonna have to be like Mike, like back in the day. Where you remember that? It's been a long time.
I love that.
No one ever heard it, but
I loved it. It was so painful, but I loved it.
It was constantly. So Mike would run questions by me ahead of time.
Yeah,
just to either, and I was always I was always distracted doing something else. So he would like, so and so says blah 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 blah. And then he'd be like, Bob, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, could you read that again? And so then he would do it again, and I would be doing something else again. And then finally, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. You just because he wouldn't do what you did, like he wouldn't like make sure there's no repeats. He just was like, put them all in, ask me, and then we would start doing the show. And then of course I would, get ahead of some of the questions already just from talking. And so it was constant. All right, Teresa wants to know blah blah blah. I'm like, nope, skip it. Already answered that. Skip it. Nope, not that one. Cut that one. That was.
He'd be like half a sentence in, and Bob would just go next.
Yeah, I forgot. That's what I can't remember what I always said. I go next,
Mike.
Next. Yeah.
And yet he didn't want to work with you anymore.
Who knows
I miss
why?
Mike. Who knows why? Yeah, I miss Mike.
Yeah.
Nicole, nobody got COVID. Nobody, I mean, at least that I know of, nobody at any of our meetups or anything. You tested, I tested. Nobody got sick. So that was great because we were definitely in a bunch of different scenarios with lots of big groups of people and everyone was safe and it was great.
Awesome. Yeah. And I got home and I felt a little stuffy on Friday morning, but it was just, I think it's from just traveling. I was run down. I had a 7-hour layover. Did I even tell you when I left the live event on Wednesday night and I had to get up at 5, my car was picking me up at 5:30 on Thursday to go to the airport in the morning. So I'm like, I'm just going to bed. And I told you about like Norm, the bartender at the hotel I was at, and I was like, I kind of want to stop and say hi to Norm, but I don't want to, I'm exhausted. And so I told myself, my friend who works on the Jimmy Kimmel show, who's from Bridgman, I was like, he goes in there a lot after work. I was like, all right, if Gary's there, I'll stop by and say hi. Because if he finds out I was staying in the hotel where he was at, and it'd be good to see him. And of course, I walk in and Gary was sitting there talking to Norm. So I slid up and we ended up, the hotel bar closes at 11, but we still sat there till 12:30 while Norm was cleaning. We were all shooting the shit. Lots changed. Norm's gotten married and had a baby since I saw him last. We had to catch up on all that stuff. Yeah, so I went to bed at 1 a.m. and had to be.
Did his name change during that story?
Norm?
Didn't you call him Gary at the beginning?
Gary's the friend that was works on Jimmy Kimmel.
I just wasn't paying attention to you. It really what was happening. But
I
just realized that he said a name and then like afterwards he's like, and then Norm.
Yeah, so I had like 4 hours of sleep and then a 7-hour layover and then 8, just everything at the Admirals Club for those because I was just bored.
Yeah.
And so I woke up Friday feeling like shit. And I'm like, I better take a test just in case. So I could tell you if your plans were going to be ruined. And they weren't.
Turned out to be all
they
right.
were not. What do you know? I didn't get C1 Niner either. Good job, Danielle. Go Charlie
Nice.
19er.
Good work, Danielle.
All right.
Well, those events were so much fun. That was great. I know we talked about some on. Yeah.
We
Yes.
should talk about the Wednesday night one a little bit
Yes.
because we recorded before that happened.
Yes.
Are there any questions? Are there any? Are there any? There's a lot of stuff I want to talk about, and I don't know. I don't want to jump ahead of your question. Are there any questions in there where people are really wanting to understand the importance of the DNA on the socks, or where people are challenging that the sock DNA is not important? Because there's like tons of discussion on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything about the socks not being important.
Okay.
I don't
So
have
I'll
anything
address that kind
like
of.
that. I don't think. I don't know that. Yeah, I'm actually looking to see. I only saw one. I apologize if I missed something, but I think I only saw one question that I would say were specific to the socks, because I do organize the questions in categories that I make for myself, and I see one that says the socks, and there's only one question underneath there.
Okay,
so but there's lots of general questions about the testing and that.
I'll address that at the beginning. I'm trying to figure a way to not be super negative about it whenever, but there's there's people that are like, the socks are, it's transfer, that's stupid, it doesn't matter, and then so I want to address that because there's posts on the page where people are talking about that. And is there anything in there about I think I saw one question, I don't know if you grabbed it, where somebody posted how somebody had posted wide shots of the business card and it seems to not fit with what I said. And
yes, I do have some stuff about that.
I'll wait on that then.
Okay,
perfect.
And if you want me to start, I can read you the socks question first, because it's also asking for some clarification and stuff, if you think you're going to go there.
Just ask, can you make that the first question? And then I'll kind of go off of that. All right. So we'll start off with talking a little bit about the event and some of the stuff that happened there. And then we'll just move on, and that'll be the first question.
Right.
Good plan?
Yeah. The one I wasn't at, the event I wasn't at. Yeah. I wasn't invited.
And then we'll ask you about your thoughts on the episode.
On the event? Can you ask me my thoughts on the event?
I'll love, happy to do it. All righty. We're Zach and I back together again. Now, Janet is the loneliest number this week.
That's right.
Sitting all by herself in her studio in California.
It's nice to be here again. It's nice to see people.
Yeah. Yeah. Right next to each other. We can touch one another if we want to. Yeah.
That's awkward.
Before we get into, we've got a ton of listener questions. This one really is the last episode of the year. This one, I was thinking when I recorded the main that was going to be it, and I was too lazy to like redo an intro. I'm like, this is the last. Maybe not. It could be. I think maybe there's another one. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But this is the last episode.
I did say that in the intro. Even. See, I'm ahead of you.
There you go. So first thing I wanted to, after we recorded the follow-up last week, Janet and I, along with several special guests, had a live event in Los Angeles last Wednesday night. And Zach, we'd like your thoughts on it.
How was that? How was it, Bob? I wish that I wish I could have been there, but I'd like to hear how it went for you guys.
Yeah. I'm glad you, Zach. Sorry, we're a little punchy today. We're like this
Christmas
close
spirit.
to Christmas break.
Yeah, it's like the school bell's about to ring, and everybody's gonna go out. Yeah.
No, I thought it was great. And speaking of which, for those of you that are on Patreon, everybody at the bronze, those are the $5 level and up. Today, Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, that will publish as a podcast episode for all you patrons. You can go. So if you're not a patron, you can go become a patron and go check it out. If you're already on Patreon, just look in your podcast feeds and it'll pop up where all the ad-free episodes come up at 3:00. I will say that the audio's not great. We ran into a hiccup. We were planning on plugging a recorder into their soundboard so we could get like our microphone voices through it. And then we got there and that was not possible. So it was just like a Zoom recorder set on the table in the middle of all of us. So it's tough to hear. It's not great, but
who was at the event?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Zach. It was myself and the amazing and powerful Janet Varney. And Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott. The four of us were on it. Well, actually, I got kicked off my own stage. They were all sitting behind the table on the stage, and the equipment was an issue. one of the mic cords was like 3 feet long. So I had to stand next to the soundboard while
Oh,
the
you
other
loved
3
it. You were like holding court. It was basically
Oh.
like you were doing a nonstop like toast at a wedding. You're like, and furthermore, and everyone
Yeah.
else was sitting, and you
Mhm.
were like, yeah, you
Could
made it
not feel
work.
more like a fish out of water when everybody sees
You
like
made
this
it work.
table with the panelist all sitting there, and then I'm just standing awkwardly next to the table because I can't reach the table or get away from it. Like I'm just stuck in that little
Yeah.
tiny spot. So it was like, and that was a game day decision. It was like, well, it's time to go. I can't sit
Yeah.
down. So we're just gonna
You
do this.
could have sat down. You just would
Also,
have
we
had
didn't
to
have a
be-
chair,
We didn't have
remember?
a chair. That's the real thing, because you could have been just sitting on the end of the table, but we also ran out of chairs because it was so full. Everyone came and every
Yeah.
chair was accounted for, and we didn't have an extra chair, which actually is a great thing. And
Yeah.
you got a little more exercise just standing.
Or planning on our part, because we should have grabbed the 4 chairs we needed before everybody got there.
There's your big mistake, sir. We needed 5 chairs. 5 chairs.
Wait, not 5.
Yeah.
Who was the 5th?
Oh, Jim.
Oh,
The special guest that
the
we
special
are
guest
not
You
talking
didn't tell me
about
Jim
yet.
was there.
I haven't gotten that far yet. So yeah. Yeah, so we just kind of like talked through kind of our experience, which you guys heard a lot of that stuff on the follow-up, but then we had 3 mystery guests that are no longer mysteries that showed up. The first one was, of course, Jim Clementi. Came by. I had a quick drink with him and kind of updated him on some things with the case before he came over there. And so when we got into the case a little bit, Jim came up and shared his thoughts on the case with the new information. And the best quote, I just put it up on the follow-up because I was listening as I was getting ready to post it for the patrons. Very interesting thing that he said as he was giving us his new analysis was, his exact quote was, if Becky had been the first to be killed, her body would have been found inside the house. And he's got a whole breakdown of that. That's all on the episode and everything. But it was just, I really felt like we almost kind of had a breakthrough in the moment, because the way we didn't plan it, it was just like, I told
No,
everybody.
you were nervous. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were like, I don't know if he might not say what I would hope that he would. He may not come to the conclusion I would hope he would come to with this information.
Yeah. Because I just kind of threw it out to him in real time. And I told the audience, I'm like, this is what it's like. You know, I have a thought or a question. I called Jim and we just have a conversation about it. That's this, because he doesn't know what I'm about to tell him and ask him. And so we kind of went through it, and yeah, super interesting with Jim. So Jim was on stage for a little bit. And as I said, us and, Dr. Shallow, Dr. Scott weighed in here and there. And then Liz Rose made an appearance and came up and kind of thanked the audience and gave us a little update on Sandy, her mom, who in the updates were one that I had already talked a little bit on the show, that the Innocence Project of Texas has now joined the fight for her mother. And
That's great.
Yep. And is working to fight for her. And also that there has been DNA testing done. And some of the DNA testing done was of the blood that was on the safe that was assumed by police to have been Jim's blood. As it turns out, it's not Jim's, and it's no family members.
Interesting.
So they have the killer's DNA.
That's great.
And we
Very,
don't know
very,
where
very
things are gonna
exciting.
Go from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that's some stuff that Zellner had worked on before, where she kind of passed the torch over to the IPTX. So that was cool. And then our last special guest was the one and only John Cryer. John Cryer stopped
Awesome.
by. Ducky came by.
Ducky.
Yep. Which is really cool. John
That's
is, for especially being a comedic actor, he is he's a really inspiring guy. And I told him I was in town, I'd like to see him, and asked me if he wanted to come to the event. He was actually decorating the Christmas tree with his family, and Lisa, his wife, said said you can leave and go for 20 minutes and then come back. So he
That's
popped
lovely.
in, yep, said a few words, and then headed back to his family for the evening. So it was a fun night. We were still, Janet was running me off the stage right at 9:00 when the band.
I made a promise. I made a sacred vow, because as a producer of a comedy festival and other events, I know what it feels like when the person who's supposed to be getting ready to come up on stage is like, oh, they're still up there.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
I'm
time to
supposed to
go.
be getting my stuff up there. Yeah.
They needed to
So
make
that's
way
fun.
for the band that came on after us. That was because they had a lot of displays. They had candles and pictures of babies.
It looked actually really cool. I was super curious. Had I not
Oh, I
been
was like, what's
exhausted, I would have. Yeah, I was like,
I
oh,
live
what
in
a
the
day.
Midwest. I was like, what
Yeah.
the fuck is all this that they're
Yeah.
putting on this?
Just another
was-
Wednesday night in Silver Lake. It
Yeah.
looked super
Alright.
cool.
Yeah, it was interesting they were setting up. But anyway, it was a great time, great event. And as I mentioned last week, it was awesome to get to hang out with Janet in person and get to see everybody again in LA in person. Everybody except Zach, who I missed terribly.
That was
I missed-
hard. I wish you were there. I wish you
I
had
missed
been
you
there.
guys.
We almost couldn't have
We
fun
missed
because you weren't
you.
there.
I missed you guys, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I'll be there next time,
Next time.
or the next time,
One of those times.
or one of those.
Yeah.
I'll be there eventually.
Yeah. All right. And with that, I don't think we had any other.
Are we going to Obsessed Fest?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have like the details yet, but
I'll be there.
I did talk to Patrick on Monday, and he let me know that they're going to be reaching out about Obsessed Fest. I'm hoping that all three of us will be going to Obsessed Fest next year.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely hope so. I won't be there if I'm not invited.
The
I'm
tickets
not going to
are-
crash it. I guess
the
I'll put
tickets
it
are
that
like
way.
$150. Just get yourself a ticket.
Great,
Come on
great,
down.
great,
Yeah,
great,
yeah,
great.
yeah. All right. Let's get into this episode. I know we have a ton of questions about the case. First of all, your thought. Oh, I should clarify one time because I won't call this person out, but they're very involved and they pay a lot of attention and make lots of great points and ask great questions. Asked me after Susanna's interview if they tested the DNA against all of the teenagers, which led me to believe that either she hadn't listened on Friday or that I didn't make clear on Friday. So I wanted to point out again that after I recorded that interview, we found more documents that showed that the DNA on the socks in her pant cuffs on Becky's was compared to Javier, Jacob, Ron, I think Austin, Bo Nash. It was compared to all those people, but we didn't know that when we recorded the interview. So just kind of refreshing everybody's memory about that. What do you think, Zach?
It was really interesting. I mean, I'm not, like I said in the intro, I'm not the smartest man, so some of it was a little over my head, but it was very interesting to hear Susanna kind of break it down and how certain alleles line up and all this stuff. I mean, it was interesting. Listen.
Yeah, you kind of, and a lot of the science. Hang on real quick. Somebody's asked me to turn my mic up. Can you guys hear Zach okay? Sorry, Kelly, you'll have to clean this up.
Can you guys hear me? Do I sound
Because they
beautiful?
told me they need me to turn my mic up.
I probably sound beautiful.
Or I can turn my mic down.
No, I think the problem is they can't hear me. So let me try. Test. Does this help? Janet, can you hear me better if I do this?
You sound louder.
Test. That gets louder.
Yeah, you're way
Mhm.
loud.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I was trying to find the one that would turn it up for the Zoom, but not turn it up for our recording. So that sounds good. Y'all are perfect. No one's ever said that to me, Nick. Thank you. Everyone sounds fine to me. Okay, here we go. So you just said that. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that was confusing, but for me, I listened to her explain the science behind it, and then asked her to explain what that means to me. And so I took a lot away from it. Jan, what did you think of the interview?
I thought it was really interesting. I respected the, it's always nice when an expert is not just going to say a thing and hope that no one checks them on it. Or, I mean, I just appreciated that she was like, I would say this. I definitely wouldn't say this. Please don't press me on this. I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I understand why someone made the decisions that they made. Like, it was very, to me, she seemed extremely measured. And, it was just sort of a reminder to me of like this. To me, it felt like she was a straight shooter. Like, she wasn't going to give you an answer that you wanted if it wasn't true.
Right.
I wish I could say I felt that way about anytime, a lab director or a technician is interviewed in the scale of all of the cases that we've all, as true crime fans, become familiar with. So for me, that was reassuring. Like, that she was like, well, I think it's enough of a profile to send to CODIS. I would say yes, but she wasn't like, anybody who wouldn't do this is crazy. So I appreciated that. It seemed very balanced.
I appreciated her transparency too about saying that the other lab had technology they didn't have. And you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Go run through this. I mean, I appreciate that because, so many times, so often you have the person just like, oh no, we can do it all. But she was very transparent and saying, no, they have a program that you should send it to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also she was able to like do what I was hoping, which is help me understand things better. Because, for example, when I read those DNA results as a layman in the episode the week before, I was like, this is bullshit. You can't do DNA and it's 1 in 320,000 and the next time it's 1 in 20 million. So it was great to have her come on and say, no, that's not something you should be worried about. That's not
Right.
There's an actual logical explanation for that. Um, and I appreciated that a lot. She's great. She is definitely a scientist and is going to give you, and she's really kind of vested now after that. She's emailed me since, and I haven't heard from her yet, but she was going to try to get me um a kind of an update now that she has more documents. One of the things that's in the doc, she was talking about, it looks like it could go to CODIS, but she's not sure. What we see now is what it's, and this is one of the most frustrating things about this to me. On the documents where they took the DNA from her pant cuffs and her socks, at the bottom it says CODIS ready.
Right. It's hard
So,
to misunderstand that
yeah.
pretty simple
So
statement.
that wasn't, I don't think that was on the document she had, but it's on the ones now
Got
where
it.
they showed like, yeah, this is, and that's the lab saying this is full profile and it can be run through CODIS, and then the DA deciding, or the sheriff's, or it would be the DA at that point because after the arrest, and the DA deciding not to do it. They already knew who it didn't belong to, and they decided not to find out who it did belong to.
I mean, what would be the reasoning? Would there be like a financial reasoning behind that, or
No.
just they don't want bad evidence?
In my opinion, they don't want bad evidence. I mean, there's plenty of people that are out there right now trying to explain this shit away, but it's nonsense. I mean, you have, what it looks very much to me, look at when they tested it. There's, and I found now, I've been digging through this stuff all week. There is a lot of evidence that has yet to be tested. They took scrapings and swabs off Becky's shoes and found hairs in her shoes and her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a ton of all this trace evidence.
Yeah.
That they had this, and they had taken those swabs off the socks and the pant cuff back in 2006. They had this the whole time, and they never tested it. They tested it after they had made the arrest. Like I told you, they made the arrest. They were going all in with that business card. The original judge was not, he said like that could be transfer you like this, what, and then there were some shenanigans going on. They were trying to call the DA in. Again, the judge issued a bench warrant for the district attorney to come in and answer for what they were doing, and then they ended up dropping the charges. And so then they finally decide. So you got to look at like what was the reasoning for testing it to begin with. They finally test that evidence because they're trying to build a case against Robert and Christian, and then they test it and it's not them. So then they go and they compare it to everybody, so that perhaps so they can figure out if it's transferred. Like, okay, well, maybe it's Javier's or Bo's. They were at her house a couple days before. Maybe it's John's or whoever's, and could be a person of interest or suspect or dad. They tested against all these people, and it wasn't any of them. So then, in my opinion, the only other plausible explanation is that's the killer's DNA. But they had committed to go after Robert and Christian, and finding someone else's DNA there that wasn't supposed to be there. And that's why I'm so fired up, and why I'm so frustrated, and why I'm actively actually engaging on social media with some of the people that I normally will just ignore, because this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to make an argument. There is no argument when all they had to do was submit that to CODIS and just find out if maybe there's a violent offender that lived in that neighborhood.
Right.
But it's a match to, or that lived somewhere else or whatever, and they didn't want to do it because it's bad evidence. They already knew anything they would have gotten by running that through CODIS could not have helped their case against Robert and Christian.
Okay.
Right.
You know what I mean? If they ran through and it's nothing, it does nothing, but it doesn't help. If they run it through and it's somebody else's, now you just gave the defense a whole argument.
Right.
They could say, how can you say it's them when there's this person's DNA on it? And in my opinion, it's despicable, because they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a conviction. And that's why they didn't run it.
This is a side note that I 100% know we don't have time for, but I just am going to say what other people might be thinking about, which is this has made me want to revisit the whole DNA conversation about JonBenet. I'm tucking that away because there's a whole conversation about like what was found on her clothing and how easily that could have quote unquote been transferred. So just to be in fairness to like multiple conversations about multiple cases, like I just, in my mind, I was like, well, you have to sort of apply all those rules to everything. And so if for example, JonBenet's dad is fighting to get that stuff tested because there's an argument that wasn't tested against all the people it could have been, or that it wasn't run through CODIS. Again, this is off the top of my head, but that just came up for me when you were talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, well, You know, if another family in another scenario is arguing test the evidence, and they didn't run it because they thought it was the family, like, interesting. You know, Kelly, you can feel free to get rid of that. I know it's a whole conversation, but that's just what popped into my mind when it's like a victim and DNA on the clothing. And also, I don't want Jim Clementi coming after me. You know what? He can come after me. It's fine. He's great. Yeah. So I don't everything that I would have to say, I think it can be folded in or isn't necessary because listeners asked it because they're great. So I'm happy to start whenever you want.
Yeah, let's go ahead
with-
and get
with the
into. I
actual
know your first
question.
question about the socks. I'm holding back from continuing my rant about the socks until
Okay.
you ask this question. So,
So Lana or Lana, and I'm sorry, I don't know the pronunciation, but says, how did they know there was DNA on Becky's socks unless they tested them? And if they tested them, where are the results? It also sounds like part of the initial DNA testing were left out of the report, and then just sort of ending it with like, not sure if I understood all of that correctly. You've touched on some of that already, but
yeah, so the socks were swabbed. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but and I'm not even sure. I'd have to go back to the report and look when the socks were swabbed. If they swabbed them in 2014 or 2015 when they ran them to Sorensen, or if they already had the swab that whole time and never tested. I suspect they hadn't swabbed it until then.
I'd see I will say that's a thing I continue to not really be able to wrap my head around. I understand that it's an expense and time consuming thing. So it's on one level, I understand the pragmatism of not swabbing everything. But on the other hand, in my mind, I'm like, if you're collecting any evidence at all, why wouldn't you immediately run at least as much of that as your department could afford? And maybe the answer is we could afford nothing. I don't know. But like, I just that's tough for me. It's like, we swabbed all of this stuff. Why do you just put it in a bag and go like, this might come in handy 10 years from now? I don't understand that. Or 1 year from now or whatever.
You touched on it. The whole point of like, why would they not test the sock, but they test the pen and they test the business card that's out in the middle of nowhere? I mean, why would they not test the sock?
Well, and that's what I was going to say. Is that it's really hard to make the cost argument when they did how many tests on the same business card.
Right.
You know what they had. You know, and it was because they weren't getting the results that they were looking for. And again, as it appears, the end result was they were right. You know, they had a suspicion that it was, I guess, Christian or one of their DNA on the card.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just continued to test it and continued until they, you know, with new technology until they found the result they were looking for. I don't fault them for that, but the fact that they were spending that much energy on it and ignoring the evidence that was on the victim's body, I'll never be able to make sense in my mind. And that's
Right.
so. And this is where I want to address, because I don't think I may ask them to follow, but there's a lot of discussions where people have made posts and asked questions throughout the fan page about the relevance of the sock DNA. And I gotta say, like, this is like to the point of like as pathetic as I have seen people get, where people are so caught up in their foregone conclusion that Robert and Christian must be guilty, that there's these crazy arguments that are being brought up to try to explain away the socks. And it's the most inconsistent thing ever. So I just want to break this. I don't want to get negative about it. I'm just going to break down this scenario for like in a neutral way. If you look at this, to say the business card, like say, as I said at the end of the, let's just assume LeClaire found it where he said he found it when he said he found it. Okay, let's just figure that's a thing, and we'll assume that Christian's DNA is on it. So over 300 yards out into the desert, there's this card that's found, and for a person to be fully convinced that card has to be connected to the murders, that the DNA and the fingerprints on there has to be the murder, despite all the issues with the lack of tracks. You know, for someone to walk 300 yards and back, somebody had told me, I think Teresa Dunn had said, like, she like did the math when she thought it was 180 and calculated the amount of steps someone would have to take to walk out there and back. And it's like over 500 steps it would take with a normal average person's gait. And we have 5 footprints. 5.
Yeah.
So, you know, but with all that and it being way out there, 20 yards north of any human activity, this whole thing, I think it's okay for you to say, well, I still think that has to be connected to the crime. But it's not okay, and it's not consistent to then say, hey, we've got heavy DNA profiles, like a good volume of DNA, CODIS ready DNA on the victim's body,
Right.
in the places where the killer would touch her body to put her in the wheelbarrow. And then the amount of effort some people are expending to try to explain that away. It's like that. This is how these wrongful convictions happen, is that attitude. And seeing it happen with people who aren't in the system is it, because I look at these prosecutors, I'm like, how could you do that? I'm like, that's how, because you're just people like this that are just stuck in them. And I'm not categorizing the people as a certain type of people. I'm just saying, when you get into a mindset where you're so sure of yourself that you just can't let go of your belief, that's what. So this is the argument that I've heard. Well, I've heard socks are like, I don't remember the term they use, but basically socks collect DNA all over the place. Socks are the easiest thing to ever get DNA on. That could be transferred DNA from anyone. First of all, I asked somebody on the page twice and they refused to answer the question, and I was having a good discussion with this person, but I asked them, if you didn't know about the business card, would you think that the DNA on her socks are relevant to the crime? And they refused to answer the question, but I asked it for a very particular reason, because what it shows is, what you're seeing is when you have a suspect driven investigation where you start with a conclusion and then you're going backwards and trying to find evidence to fit the conclusion. And you're explaining the stuff that doesn't fit. You're trying to, in your mind, find a way to get rid of it. But if you don't know the business card exists and you haven't already come up with a conclusion, so you're not thinking Robert and Christian did it, how does this evidence relate to that? If you're just doing an evidence-based investigation and you look, oh, the victim has DNA on her socks, on her body, on her pants, no one would ever think that's not part of the crime. You would immediately believe that's the killer's DNA. The only reason that we take the steps to try to talk around that is because we already have a conclusion in our mind, or somebody already has a conclusion in mind. And here's the facts when it comes to, because people are making these posts, and I just want to clear this up. Like, the argument is, it could be transfer, that could be from anyone. You pick up DNA on a sock all over the place. First of all, I've never seen any studies or science on that. Second of all, I just updated my computer and I couldn't print. So I was going to give you the full quote, but I ran out of time. But according to Javier, at 6:40 p.m., Becky had gotten out of the shower, done her makeup, got dressed, even says she put her jeans and her shoes on. So first of all, for these socks to have DNA transfer on them from someone else, you'd almost have to believe that she got out of the shower and put on dirty socks, which isn't impossible. But you might assume, especially if she thinks she's going on this hike with her, this guy she likes, with Robert, that she would probably put on clean socks that had been laundered. So then the argument comes, well, here's an article that shows the DNA can survive laundry. That's true. It can, in small amounts, usually with stains. So if you have like blood or semen, say on a bed sheet that's soaked in and stained and is bound to the, that fluid is bound to the fibers, and you run it through the wash, it is still possible to get some DNA off of that even after the laundering, presuming it wasn't bleached and run in really hot water. And she has black socks, so they're not bleached. But touch DNA, this is from a swab of the socks. So we're looking at skin cells from the socks. Can some skin cells survive the laundry and still be hanging onto the sock? Sure. I'm sure that's possible. Can this volume of skin cells survive laundry? I'm sure maybe there's a study. I don't even know if there would be, because but in my opinion, like, no, you're not going to get full DNA profiles of two people on a pair of socks that have been through the laundry. So then, even if we say, well, the DNA could have made it through the laundry, well, whose fucking DNA is it? We know everybody she was with for that entire week leading up to it We know whose houses she was at. So who are these male profiles?
Right.
You would expect to maybe see Javier's DNA on there. She hung
Mhm.
around him. She slept in the same room as Bo. Bo slept in her bedroom. Maybe she's walking on the floor. She lived with John. But it was none of them. All of those people were ruled out. So to go through the mental gymnastics to try to explain it away is ludicrous. That DNA, I won't say has to be, but almost has to be from the killer. From the killers. There's just no other explanation for it. And then also we'll add to the fact, and the people are like, oh, well, sure, they'd grab, I've seen they would grab her by the ankles or the knees, which, by the way, there's swabs taken from her pant cuffs right there in the crease of her knee. But not on her socks. She was wearing low ankle socks. So if they held her by the ankles, they wouldn't touch her sock, which, that's assuming a whole lot of things. But let's not forget her shoe was pulled off and the sock rolled down around her foot. She wasn't walking around like that. She didn't not have time to put it on. According to Javier, she already had her shoes on and the shoes missing. Right. So it sure seems like the action of her shoe coming off and the sock getting rolled down happened during the attack, which would mean the killer's hands very likely were part of that process. And the DNA results we're getting and the volume of DNA from that kind of confirms that. That there was a struggle there and they left DNA behind. So those are all the reasons why I believe that DNA is incredibly important. This case is much simpler than I thought. I didn't think we'd be able to solve it this easily, but I really think that we can. Between that, the extra testing that Susanna has suggested, and just taking the DNA where we have and running it through CODIS or through GEDmatch, I think could very easily solve the case, which would be fantastic because we'll get the right person in prison and get the wrong people out of prison, and that's all we're trying to do. But another point that I'll make along those same lines is some of these discussions were about the wheelbarrow handles, and I'm not amazed. I think a lot of people just don't realize they've gotten themselves in. It's the mindset people accuse me of being in all the time, but people don't realize when they're doing it themselves. Is someone made a post and said, well, there's no substantial DNA on the handles, which and the conclusion they came to was, well, that proves that the killers must have been wearing gloves, and therefore the DNA on the socks isn't important. So that's the train. Which, how do you get there? The same way. You start with the conclusion. It was Robert and Christian who did it. Robert and Christian's DNA isn't on the socks. So that can't be the killer's DNA.
Right.
And in order for it to be Robert and Christian, with the DNA, with the business card being way out there, they had to have used the wheelbarrow. So if we know that Robert and Christian used the wheelbarrow and there's DNA isn't on the wheelbarrow handles, that means they must have been wearing gloves, and therefore the DNA on the socks doesn't matter. Whereas if you listen to Susanna Ryan break it down, that's not what she sees at all. That wasn't the opinion. That's certainly not my opinion. My opinion, it shows everything I just explained as to why that is almost positively the killer's DNA on her socks and her pant cuffs and her ankles there. But because of that, that tells me the killer wasn't wearing gloves. And the lack of DNA on the handles shows that what I have hypothesized since episode 2, which was that the wheelbarrow wasn't actually used in the crime other than to hold her body. That if they weren't wearing gloves, there should have been DNA on the handles. There's not, which further drives the point home that the wheelbarrow wasn't used. Now, maybe that's me coming to the foregone conclusion, but I'm just trying to look at it and see, what does it all mean, instead of trying to make it fit with another narrative. Susanna certainly wasn't trying to make it fit in any narrative. That was just the conclusion she got to, was if you take the socks and compare it to the handles, what you see is that the wheelbarrow wasn't pushed by the killer, but the killer touched her ankles, is the most likely solution. And we'll find out what, hopefully when we get some of this testing done and these things done, we'll find out. Yeah, I could be wrong. I'm certainly willing to be wrong.
But even if that's the case, let's say, as you're breaking this down, if that is the case, let's say it's Robert and Christian and they wore gloves during the commission of this crime. There's still mystery DNA that we don't know who it belongs to.
Right.
Why would you not try to figure that out to see if it's somebody? Because
as far
we
as
know,
what the district attorney,
we know the known players, and it
Right.
doesn't match any of the known players. So there's some mystery person out there that's had contact with Becky. Why would you not at least look into that?
Yeah, it's crazy that they didn't. And I don't remember if I said this on the follow-up or if I just said it at the event last week, but the more and more I look at the case, and I'm planning on, I don't know what we're going to get on first of the year, because I'm working on an episode to do like the actual trial testimony about how all this was presented at trial with the forensic evidence. But I'm working on something, and I'm reevaluating the arson investigation and doing what I never did the first time around, which is do my own arson investigation based on the photos.
Okay.
And as I'm doing that, I'm leaning toward like if I had to bet a paycheck on, at the end of the day, when we prove who did this, I would bet that our killers live in that neighborhood and they've never been on our radars.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I think the cops were so honed in on those teenagers that they missed the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
That it was right there the whole time. The fact that there was no car. No one saw a car. There was no one drove away. And we did some experiments while we were up there where we drove and checked the different places where someone could park a car, and it's too dark. It's too still. Even if you walked a mile away, got in your car, the minute you started it, it would be like a giant beacon.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody drove at all. I think
that really struck me when we were up there. And I of course I was not up there at night, as I know you and Shiloh were, and Andrew was, but yeah, I wasn't up there at night, and I still just couldn't. It was really, really hard for me to wrap my head around. Do you want to talk about this you mentioned it earlier, this idea of where the business card was and the supposed area of disturbance and all that? I've got a couple questions about it. I see someone posted about it in the YouTube. You want to jump on that?
Yeah, so it's another thing that's going on.
Yeah, I'm going to read Jim's question because I want to give a shout out to people who take the time and effort to post on the follow-up page. May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jim, buddy, what's going on? Shout out to you for writing this post on the Facebook follow-up. There have been some pictures posted of the business card just feet from what appears to be an obvious, quote, area of disturbance, which is connected to the wheelbarrow track, which is connected to the wheelbarrow with Becky's body inside. What is your explanation for this? What are the odds this business card would have been blown around days ahead of time and ended up so close to the wheelbarrow track leading to Becky?
I'm glad you asked, because this was something, and I genuinely don't think this was intentional misinformation, but the people, one of them's in the chat right now, are still just hanging on to it for dear life.
Well, I saw the picture and I was like, uh-oh, what's this?
I was too. And so I was looking, I was like, oh, well, maybe everything was wrong.
Right.
So they found a photo, which I eventually found in my file, was labeled very differently from theirs. But I found a photo where it shows in the photo, in the poster, the person who posted this had annotated it and showed the area of disturbance was marked, and then the business card in its maybe 8 feet away. I tried to measure it with
Seemed like it was less than that to me. I was like, oh, they're like next to each other,
2 or 3 steps away. And I was like, oh, well, that's a whole different story. And then I was like, well, wait, how would LeClaire have thought something was 20 yards away when it was 2 steps away?
Right.
This doesn't make much sense.
That's a problem.
So then I started digging into it and looking at it. And then someone like brought up like LeClaire's trial testimony, or his, I think it was his grand jury testimony, where he's talking about that picture.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're calling in their note that it is the area of disturbance, which is the point of origin where the wheelbarrow tracks stop.
Right.
That's not what that flag is indicating. He says this is and by the way, remember we said maybe that they were out transplanting trees?
Mm-hmm.
He said that's a hole that looks like someone had dug a hole and filled it back in.
Mm-hmm.
It was not connected to the wheelbarrow tracks. It was not connected to footprints. It was after he started kind of wandering around off to the north searching, he finds this hole, and then he finds the card.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a hand-drawn diagram where he drew this, and there's no question first of all, I did all kinds of stuff looking at the photo. Remember when we were there, we took all those pictures of the mountain ranges in the back when we were trying to find the point of origin.
Right.
And one thing I noticed in that picture was, oh, that's the Green Mountain Range. The Green Mountain Ranges were south of 74.
Right.
The one
Yes,
north
correct.
of the crime scene looked like desert.
I know exactly what you're
Couple
talking about.
little
Yes.
bushes, yeah.
Mhm.
And so then I went through the video, the crime scene video, where I think it was Leclerc that took the video that was like walking the path, and he
Mhm.
does that 360-degree pan. And so
Yep.
I'm watching, and bam, and I was able to capture. There's the exact part of the mountain ridge
Mhm.
there, and you can see Sharon Coleman's house
Yep.
off to the right, which can and what I was, for the people that were confused on that post when we we're discussing it, is the reason I that was important to point out is because it shows that the camera was facing south when he took the picture.
Yeah.
The picture that's in question.
Yes.
And in the picture, you see the hole in the yellow flag on
Mhm.
the right-hand side of the picture. And on the
Mhm.
left-hand side of the picture, you see the pink flag that's the business card that's a little bit further forward and to the left. And so now that we know this is south,
Mhm.
what we know is that in that picture, the business card is about 2 steps southeast of the hole, which means it's not the area of disturbance as it was labeled by the poster. So, and I know that's kind of muddy. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay, so yeah. So the big question was, they put up this picture and said, "Look, Bob's wrong. Everybody's wrong. The card's right next to the area of disturbance. It's
Right.
it's right next to it." And what we determined was that wasn't the area of disturbance. That was in the area of disturbance. It
Mhm.
was just a hole that
Mhm.
was found by Leclerc outside of the tracks.
Mhm.
And to the southeast of that is where the business card was, which was 20 yards north of where the actual
Right.
termination point of
So-called
the
area
wheelbarrow
disturbance
was.
was.
From there, we started looking at Teresa Dunn, who helps us out a lot. Had showed me, and I had seen a different version of this, but the handwritten were on his notepad where Leclerc drew the map.
Mhm.
It couldn't be clearer. He shows placard A, placard B, placard C, placard E, and then he the track splits and then goes over, and the picture over to the left, which would be the east, and shows track stop, the termination point. And that's where Becky's footprint was. That's where the footprint stopped. Back where it split, you go 20 yards up to the north where there's no footprints.
Mhm.
And then he showed, and it's even marked there, hole,
Mhm.
business card.
Okay.
The two. That's what those two pictures were. It was a hole in a business card. It wasn't the point of origin as it was presented. So as far as how that kind of squares with what because people are like, well, how do you reconcile that? Let me tell you, give you some examples how I would have reconciled that. If that was the area of disturbance and that was the business card, I would have reconciled it by going, well, that's new information we didn't have before. That
Mhm.
changes the way we should look at this.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But nothing changed. The business card's still 20 yards north of any human activity, other than there's a hole there. And I think he said it was maybe by an animal. You couldn't tell, but you could tell it was a hole that was dug and refilled there.
Mhm.
So if you see that post on the follow-up, if you read through the comments, I explain it. I posted the pictures that I'm talking about in the fan page where it shows that, for here's 6 different reasons this is not what they're saying that it is. But it's interesting because the way Leclerc drew that map where it says track split, it's sure now he never says the wheelbarrow tracks continue up there.
Right.
So I don't know if that's just the way he walked up or the trail. There's no photos of it, and he never testified that he said in his report it was 20 yards north of the point of origin. But if the wheelbarrow tracks go up there, and he did say there was no footprints around it, then that sure looks a lot more like a wheelbarrow getting moved around in several different areas, getting trees or doing some kind of work, than going out, picking up a body, turning around, and going back. But not for nothing. That's the explanation, Jim, for how I reconcile that is it was a good effort. I believe it was an effort that was rooted with good intentions,
Mhm.
that they truly believe they found new information. They did. It's just
Right.
not the information they thought they found, but that is
Right.
not the point of origin
Right.
or the area of disturbance as has been discussed in the report.
Okay. Well, just to continue with that same line of using this image that was on the Truth and Justice Facebook page. Teresa says recently posted files on the Truth and Justice site show the business card as photographed on the same roll as other things like the shoe prints. How could they be on that roll if they remembered or considered or photographed afterwards?
I have no idea, because so in my case file, which is the discovery file that was given to the defense by the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have roll 1, roll 2, roll. What I have is a list under the files are under the person who took the photos under their name. So LeClaire said Barrows was with him and took the photos. So I went to the Barrows files, and there's 5 or 6 files under Barrows, and went through all the different pictures that were taken by Barrows, and the business card wasn't in those. I found the picture they found in my file. It was listed under Carr, CARR-twin. So I don't know who that is or what that means, but it was not under a different role. But it's certainly not. As a matter of fact, in that subfolder, it said return trip to scene.
That
yeah,
seems pretty clear.
Well, it could be, but also, like, to be fair, I don't know who this person is. Were they there at night? Because some of their pictures are at night when the fire trucks are still there. Like, were they there at night and then left and then came back?
Right.
I won't jump to the conclusion, but yeah, I mean, it seems like,
or it got miscategorized. But it is odd that in the discovery file it wouldn't be presented in sequential order of when the photographs were taken, because that only helps the prosecution to make its case. Like, I don't know why you would give discovery to the defense unless you're like, in master manipulator, and you're like, we're going to make them think that this picture was taken out of order when really it was taken in order. Like, that's insane. That would never happen. So my opinion.
And I don't know. And I'm not even saying there's anything like nefarious with it, because I've seen, like, they've shown me like an evidence tag that says roll 5, and then these file names are like roll, but there's not a single file name in the entire discovery file that says roll anything.
Right.
So I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
It doesn't match what I have.
Got it. Understood. Great. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to read some more DNA questions. Ellen says, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but I am ever so puzzled. Love that. Ever so puzzled that through all of the DNA testing, Marie's DNA didn't show up on the card. And Marie being the person whose name is on the card, right?
Right.
Didn't show up on the card. If she handled it and wrote the email on there, why is her DNA not there on the card? If there's enough DNA to swab years later from someone else, shouldn't her DNA be a major contributor as well?
You never know. Because it wasn't like that card, those were her personal business cards that she passed out, where she was handling them a lot. Like, for all we know, it wasn't even her that wrote the email address on there. We do have her. I mean, I have her interview, and it's on the docket to go through it. It's short. There's not much to it, but she may explain that. But yeah, just kind of like touching the corner of the card and writing an email address with a pen. But then they were just handed to someone to take to churches and places to be, where there was like stacks of them, and then people took them to carry with them and pass them out. So it's
okay.
And plus we don't know how long it was. I mean, there's a lot of things going on there. I don't know.
But just to sort of imagine the perspective, again, we have not gone through the trial, so I don't know what, opening, middle, and closing arguments were or anything like that. Is the argument that it's peculiar, again, from the prosecution's case perspective, is their argument like, we know Christian's never been on the scene because he says he's never been there.
Right.
We know that the business card, putting aside like where it was found, like the business card was there, it was near the crime scene, or it was near the area of disturbance or whatever. But is that part of the argument? Like, how could he never, if he's never been up there, but his DNA is the most prevalent, like, obtainable DNA on that business card, how can you possibly say that this was old and that it, there would be other people's on there? It's got to be significant that his DNA is on there and he's never been to the scene, and his DNA is the most DNA that we're able to find.
Yeah, well, it wasn't presented quite in that way, but it was definitely presented as, he said he's never been to the scene, and here's a card with his DNA and fingerprints on it. There's no, the prosecution certainly presented that as, there's no other plausible explanation than he was here to kill Becky.
Right.
And they didn't really make the defense tried to raise that, the card looked weathered and things, that it could have been there for a long time. But yeah, and so that was the challenge, right? It was the defense trying to say, well, that card could have been, dropped there anytime because, Becky was at Robert's house. That card, something that probably came from Robert's house, Robert's church.
Mm-hmm.
Christian was, there's all these different ways why it could have been there.
Right.
Where the prosecution's like, no, he's never been there, except for he was supposed to be there that one night in the card store. It's a compelling argument if that's all there was, right?
Right. I'm just trying to picture it because,
Mm-hmm.
I can understand. I'm always thinking too about the jury. Like, you sort of want to, because we want to believe that the jury is presented with fair evidence and then they get it right. But there are some cases where we hear what the jury decides and you're like, I don't know how that happened. Literally don't understand how that happened. So I'm always trying to imagine if I were a jury member and the prosecution was making a really compelling case of like, and you see, his is the only DNA we can even get off the card. Therefore, he must have been the last person to touch it. Therefore, he must have dropped it in the desert. Therefore, he must have been there. Therefore, he's lying. Therefore, he killed Becky. Like, you sort of see how, you know, if you're just looking at that, you're like, ooh, I guess that's like, ooh, I don't want to be wrong about this. I want to get the right person. Like, this seems bad,
And you got a lot of time to really hone in and take all the different angles to make that argument when you only have one piece of evidence to work with for the entire trial.
Fair enough.
I real quick, I'll address Nicole in the YouTube chat said, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think they're both important. I agree, Nicole. Like I've never said forget the business card.
Yeah.
I'm saying, the business card's connection is certainly questionable and weird. There's a lot of stuff around there that doesn't really add up. But yes, it's still important. Let's hang on to it. But you also have DNA on the victim's body that I think is monumentally important. That we, as far as I'm concerned, we know was connected to the crime.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is, what I hope that happens next is we find out if the business card is important.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, let's say we run those DNA profiles through CODIS and 2 hits come up from 2 convicted violent offenders that happen to live in that neighborhood. Well, then it would turn out the business card's probably not important. Right. Because we figured out who did it, and it wasn't Robert and Christian. Granted, there's still 7 people that will still maintain that it must have been Robert and Christian with them, or she must have been over at their house. They'll make an argument.
Right.
But yeah, I think they're both important. And also Montana said the card doesn't actually look weathered. I agree, Montana. It doesn't.
The sun bleached but not weathered or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole thing about the ninhydrin, and there's a couple scientists that are working with me to try to figure out if we can do some experiments to figure out if my theory about that is correct. Mm-hmm. But as far as looking at the picture of the card sitting out there, it doesn't look soiled or weathered or anything. I don't think.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things that comes up for people a lot, and I saw this a few times, and I'll shout it out when I get there. Again, I have 3 full pages of questions this time. That's on me.
Oh,
yeah. Also on our listeners for having amazing. I know. For having amazing questions. So I'm gonna blame all of us. Let's all share the blame on this. So the question becomes, like, for a lot of people, like, so what do Robert and Christian say about the business card? Like, what's Christian's explanation? Does he have one? Like, people want to know what the person whose DNA is on the card, what they said about it.
So here's the tricky thing about people doing exactly what they're supposed to do. When Robert and Christian did their first interviews, where they just sat down and openly talked to the police, the business card wasn't a thing.
Right.
Then in 2007, they did this. They find out they are suspects again because they serve search warrants on their house.
Right.
And so their reaction to that was, we need an attorney. So they got an attorney.
Sure. Of course.
And what does an attorney tell you to do?
Don't say anything. Don't
say a word. So they have not said a word about anything connected to this case since then.
Okay.
There are no statements after that. There were interviews and stuff that we'll get, like there's the whole one where the supposed Jinx confession at the military base with Christian, and all he says is, I want a lawyer.
Right.
Like that's it. I need a lawyer. So they've never weighed in on it. And then going into trial, their defense attorneys decided not to have them. I mean, keep them like at trial. They didn't put up much of a defense. The defense attorneys believed the prosecution did such a terrible job of proving their case that they didn't really need to put up much of a defense, and they didn't. And they didn't put the defendants on the stand. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't put the
Well,
defendants on
I
the stand, which
certainly
is very
understand why they
normal.
wouldn't put him. Yeah, I was going to say, like, if your only purpose for putting Christian on a stand is that he's the only one who might have a perfectly plausible, or Robert, like, if they know the entire story of how that could have happened, but it also means that they're going to be, excoriated for everything they ever said or did, or was interpreted that they ever said or did, like, that's terrifying. So I
Yeah, I mean
totally understand that, but
it's obviously the most commonly defendants are never put on the stand
right,
by a good defense attorney,
right,
because and the other thing is, what do you have to gain, right? So
right.
so if Christian got up there and gave, I don't know what it would be, but gave a perfectly plausible explanation as to why his DNA or fingerprints are on that business card,
Mm-hmm.
then the prosecution would just say he's lying. Of
Right,
course he's going to say that. It's not going to help him. But
right.
unfortunately, the position it puts us in is that question obviously is weighing on everybody's mind. What do they say about the card?
And the fact that they didn't say anything is very easily interpreted. We see it happen over and over and over again as,
Mhm.
well, they're hiding. There's something to it. If
Yeah.
I don't know the person who was not part of the trial and is just finding out about this decades later, not quite decades, but like if I'm finding out about this all this time, but if I don't have the answer, then there's something very suspicious going on. Like that's how
Yeah.
our brains work. That's how my
Right.
brain works. I'll be honest. Like, you know what I mean? It's troubling because we are attracted to this because like puzzles, and when there's something that's left open ended, it nags at us. So
Yeah,
that's
for
why
sure.
people are asking.
And yeah, and it's just unfortunate. Now, I want to be clear. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
the
No, no,
the
no. I know.
answer to the question could be Christian saying, "I don't know. I
Right.
have no
Yes.
idea."
Of course.
Or it could be, "Oh, this I have no idea," because he has been correctly from 2007 on advised by an attorney not to speak. So he hasn't given an explanation.
Right.
So I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Um, skimming, skimming, skimming. Yep. That's all. Luckily, that was all about that. Uh, for sure. There's a lot
Just
of
to
theories about how the business card could have gotten there under innocent circumstances.
Mhm.
Shout out to all of you, but I'm not going to get into those. Uh, Michelle just wanted quick clarification. If there was any way you could refresh the memory on when the police claim the card was found, and then she says, "Didn't Bob say that the report said it was found in the morning after the fire? If that's the case, how is it already sun stained?" The sun thing is
Right. Well, that was the whole point.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it says, I think he says he found it at like 10:50 in the morning. And that was kind of the point we were making was if
Yeah.
if my theory is correct, I don't know if it is, as far as the ninhydrin and showing the sun staining, then yeah, that's exactly the point. Is it certainly so if it happened during the murders, means it landed out there in the dark, and
Hmm.
then it had been out there for 3 hours of daylight before it was found, it wouldn't be sun stained. But the fact that if we're able to prove that it is significantly sun stained, it would just prove that it had been out there for days before the murder,
Hmm. Hmm.
or
Okay.
that it was found days after the murders.
Got it. Troy has a quick general question I thought was interesting. Troy says, "Are law enforcement, fire, rescue, EMs, etc., all in the DNA and fingerprint registry? If not, why?"
No, fingerprints more and more they are, because you have to do a lot of background checks. Like, so for me, when I got my EMT license, in order to go into the ER and do my clinicals, I had to be fingerprinted for background checks. And I believe once you do that, then those get all input into APHIS. CODIS, no, like you don't give DNA samples when when you're in any of those emergency services. They're just not in the system unless you've been in there. So the DNA gets put into CODIS anytime somebody, since I think 20, what year? I don't remember the year, but there was a particular year where it became law that if you get I think even arrested for a felony, your DNA gets put into CODIS. And of course, anytime any violent offenders or suspects or their DNA is run, it should be submitted into CODIS. And then also unsolved cases, and that's the side of it people don't realize is, so like, say in this case, we test this, we take these DNA profiles and we input them into CODIS, and we don't get a match. That DNA profile still lives in CODIS as an unsolved case. So if 10 years from now, someone gets arrested and they draw their DNA and they enter it into CODIS, it'll pop up that, hey, here's a case from 2006. Your DNA matches that.
Right.
So I'm very. Here's the thing. I don't believe that this crime was someone's first or last violent crime. And I think that just to clarify, like, someone has to escalate to a point where they're going to do something this horrific
Mm-hmm.
and this cold and calculated and murder these people and burn the house down. There's going to be a history of violence, and Jim talked about that too.
Right.
I also don't think that someone who has done this has gone through the rest of their life and never offended again.
Mm-hmm.
I think you will see a pattern of this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, fingers crossed. I'm hoping and praying that we're able to run this DNA through CODIS, and that it's that like run it through Bing. Here it is. Here's the people, and they
Sure.
and hopefully, if that happened, it's somebody where everybody is like, obviously, like that person it did it.
Right.
You know, look at their history, look at their track record, look where they lived, for whatever reason. I'm hoping it's just that simple.
Wouldn't that be lovely? I hope so, because I feel like we've seen several examples where they're like, so obviously we need to find the connection between Robert and Christian and this guy because he was in on it with them.
Yeah,
like,
that'll definitely happen.
Everybody tries to tack on some
that.
sort of unknown relationship. Let's talk about the win. That feels important to me. Kylie says, I just want to respectfully push back on the last frequent follow-up. Why frequent follow-up? And this will be my last episode of Truth and Justice. I retire. Want to push back respectfully on the discussion about wind direction that happened on the episode that you did last week between the hours of the murders and the discovery of the business card. Since 2006, wind data is only available for the airport in the valley and not for Pinyon Pines, I don't believe we can draw any conclusions about wind direction for the days leading up to the crime through when the business card was discovered. Wind direction changes when traveling up and around hills or mountains, making the airport data unreliable. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a point to be made there. All I can tell you is the checks that I've done on that, because the weather station that Weather Underground uses for historical weather data is out of the Palm Springs Airport, which is down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
So what I looked at was we have a place and time where the arson investigator measured the wind at the crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
Off memory serves, it said like 2 miles an hour out of the northeast, and I checked that against the Palm Springs weather data,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, I think at that time out of Palm Springs, it said it was like blowing out of the north of 3. It was very consistent. And then while we were in town, I was checking the same thing. What was the wind direction and speed down in the valley and then up at the mountain, and they were pretty consistent. But to be fair, and they're not wrong. Yeah, there's certainly some ambiguity there because they're in different places. I think as the crow flies, it's probably, I don't know, what would you say, Jan, maybe 10-15 miles if you went straight line from Pinyon Pines down to Palm Springs.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. But because, there's a big hill going up there, it could be different. There could be some different shifts. I don't know. I don't think that it would be that the winds were coming at the entire region out of the north, and somehow in Pinyon they were blowing out of the south. I don't see that being, because remember, they weren't big winds. These were just, it was a light breeze out of the north.
Yeah. I mean, I live in hills with a ton of hills and a mountain range in between me and the ocean to the west. And when the wind's coming in from the west, it's coming in from the west. But that's just my experience living in my specific area, which does happen to be in hills with a lot of mountains in between.
Yeah, but I'm happy to concede there's some ambiguity there for sure.
Sure. I know this is going to shock you because I scared everyone, but I actually do feel like that covers everything that really needs to be covered.
Okay. Real quick, let me scan through the YouTube chat, see if there's anything particular that anybody's saying before we wrap things up, because we're already long. You can clean this up, Kelly, while I'm reading through this. So the only thing I see in there is somebody in the YouTube chat is saying, why would there be only the business card that got blown from the wind out there and not other debris from the dumpster?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it didn't. I personally, I kind of doubt it was found out there, but that's.
So that photograph, the photograph that we saw that also had the other tag in it? Because that's what surprised me about that photo too, was I guess I didn't, in my mind, there was just a picture of a business card with a little evidence flag. And so that part of what kind of convinced me that it was the area of disturbance was that there was that sort of second tag there and all that kind of stuff, which seemed like more than I expected if I were imagining potentially someone saying like, ooh, I better create a scenario in which this thing is here when maybe it
Yeah.
wasn't. I don't know. I guess you'd already, maybe you
Yeah.
had.
Well, once you
had that.
see his explanation for it, where he
Yeah.
says that was like Leclerc never made nearly as big of a deal out of that hole as the people on Facebook are.
Right.
He just said it was the hole, could have been an animal. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was no footprints around it. It was just looked like someone dug a hole and refilled it.
Yeah.
And so it could have been he was out in a scenario where if the card were planted out there later, because the person in the video was telling the truth, where they said they are the ones that found it
In the
turned it
news, in the news thing. Yeah.
the news thing, then yeah, that could have been like he's moving out north of the thing, finds a hole there. Just the hole happened to be there, so he tagged. I don't know. There's still so many. Like I said, the reason I said that there is, we'll look at this through the lens of Leclerc found it when he said he found it, where he said he found it, and Christian touched it at the end of the episode 2 weeks ago, was because that scenario is still in play.
Right.
I've looked at the evidence and I have my opinion of what everything looks like, but maybe that does happen. And that's why, in that episode follows my thought process when I go through things like this. Like, first, let's see if it was found when they said it was found. Now let's see if it was really Christian on it. Regardless of my opinion of those two things, we still need to look at the scenario. What if it was exactly as it appears? What does that mean? So, so that's of course still a possibility. As far as why just the card would blow out there, I don't know, a million reasons. It could be it was just sitting on top of the trash can. It's very light and small, and the way it was folded, it could have just got caught in a current and blown out there. It could be there was more stuff out there that they didn't search because they only searched, looks like, around the tracks. I'd like to hope they looked along to try and wrap their brain around how there are no footprints going out to the point of origin, only coming back from, which is super interesting that they kind of miracled themselves out there.
That's such a huge problem. I genuinely don't know how you get around that. I really, really don't know. And I don't understand how that wasn't a huge problem for the prosecution. I don't understand how in the trial that's not like a massive issue for the defense to jump on and really drive home. So I'm very curious to see how that all plays out.
Yeah. I mean, the prosecution did a good job of trying to present it and getting ahead of things. And it was an issue. Keep in mind.
So what did they say? I guess we'll find out.
They had this DNA match with Christian on that card in 2007. They arrested him 7 years later.
Then the
which should tell you that they knew this is a problem. Right? That if they thought, oh, the evidence obviously shows that this card came from the killer, they would have arrested Christian in 2007.
Thank you for revisiting that. I think that's a really good way to sort of tie up the follow-up, because that's a really big problem.
Yeah. And then the first judge was just really pushing back hard against the prosecution for all these problems with the card.
Right.
And then so they dropped the charges. But then, the second time they've got the informant that comes forward, which, we're going to break all that down. That helped them. They got a stronger DNA match. And then lastly, they got a confirmed fingerprint match of Christian on the card. So it kind of strengthened. You lose the could be transfer DNA argument if you have for sure Christian's 2 fingerprints on the card.
Right.
Which is what they at least presented. At least that's what the findings supposedly were. I be honest with you, I question the fingerprints a lot more than the DNA.
Yeah, I think you've been clear about that.
Yeah. So yeah, as far as
poor Suzanne, as you're like, so tell me if I'm right here. You're like, about aminos. She's like, kind of.
Yeah. I don't really know. It's
you're
not
like,
my
I probably
field.
should be bothering you with this.
But that's why I hope that anybody who's being objective, sees in that scenario. Like, that's why we bring on experts. I don't bring on experts to confirm what I think. I bring on experts to give us an expert opinion, and then I generally trust that opinion, especially when it's something that involves science.
Right.
Jim and I sometimes come on and we have kind of different viewpoints, but we're talking about a behavior analysis there.
Right.
Whereas like Jim said, even for him, like it's, there's two different scenarios here. You can't really pinpoint which one you think is happening, but yeah, that was, the perfect example of the reason we bring on experts would be the DNA in that card. I thought something shady's going on here, and then I brought an expert on. She said, no, it makes sense. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I trust you. It makes sense then.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I respect that. Emily did say, did Jim change his opinion on Becky being the target? I don't know if you want to ask that, if you want to respond to that, or if you want to encourage people to continue to support the show by joining Patreon, because it's
we can do both. I mean, you think
gets good stuff done.
I'll tell you this. We'll close with this, and we're long, but it's the last one of the year. Everybody is going to have a nice holiday weekend.
Old acquaintance. Okay, go ahead.
When we were walking around out there in the desert, we had a guy named Patrick, who was Robert's boss at the HVAC place. And Patrick, if you're listening, fine, I'm going to give you credit. I told him that I was going to lie and say that I did it. Of course, I never was. I was joking.
Shout out to Patrick. You're awesome.
But he ran this scenario by me when we're wandering around out in the snow in the desert. He said, I think that Becky was upstairs because of the fire. And let me back up. I was explaining that this crime scene is super complicated, right? It doesn't make sense unless you break it up into two parts. So if you just look at John and Vicky, the crime is actually very vanilla. It literally happens almost every day. These crimes where people get shot in their houses, murdered in their houses, and then people light the house on fire to cover up the crime happens all the time. I've personally been to a handful of cases like this in the small town that I worked in. It's not uncommon. For arson, there are three major reasons you see arson. It's either for money and fraud, for revenge, or to cover up a crime. It happens all the time. So if you just look at John and Vicky, all of a sudden you see, okay, well, there was actually a pretty clear plan here that went okay. Like for the killers, like they went in, they murdered them, and they lit the house on fire, hoping they either wouldn't find the bodies or maybe they wouldn't notice. People don't know that they're going to x-ray them and find bullets and stuff like that. They just think every arson that we've ever convicted on, that I worked on, the people thought, well, the fire will cover all the evidence, not knowing that the fire creates its own evidence. So the point is, this makes sense. What doesn't make sense is Becky, right? So, but if you're not looking at Becky, you're only looking, it's like, okay, they came in, they killed them, they lit the house on fire. I can follow the train of logic the whole way, and it makes sense. But then you've got Becky burning out in the wheelbarrow, and that doesn't make sense.
Right.
We've all struggled, whether you think Robert and Christian are guilty or innocent. We've all struggled to make sense of that.
Right.
Like the idea that they killed her out in the desert, but then they took a wheelbarrow all the way back there in the dark to get her, to bring her all the way back up and then light her on fire. It doesn't add up. And I was kind of talking through that. I was like, but I just can't figure out in my mind why Becky's not in the house. And then Patrick said, well, I think she was in the house when the fire started. And all of a sudden, like the light bulb went off. Certainly people will push back on this and some people won't agree with it. But the theory that I'm leaning towards right now, and there's more, again, I'm doing an arson investigation of this crime that is even more so making this make sense. But the theory that I'm working on right now is Becky was upstairs in a room or in the bathroom when the perpetrators came into the house and attacked John and Vicky, and she was hiding from them.
Right.
When they finished killing them and they lit the house on fire, they didn't know Becky was home and she was hiding. But then at some point, the fire, remember, one of the set points was at the bottom of the stairs.
Yeah.
She couldn't get out of the house. We heard from her sisters they had an escape plan to go out the window, out the back. So if the fire's burning and now and she's heard them leave, and it's getting too hot. She can't get out. I think, and this was again from Patrick, that she probably went out the window and tried to escape out the window, like was the plan, but the killers were still there.
It doesn't even
by
matter
that-
if she heard them leave or not. Like if you're at a
You gotta
point
get out of
where
there.
we know what happens when something is on fire. We have all seen the World Trade Center videos. Like
Yes.
people do things when there's fire that defy logic. So just crawling out of your window as the escape plan you were taught is, to me, utterly realistic, whether or not she thinks they've left.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
opinion.
So the fire starting, it's obviously not enough. There's not like enough smoke to overcome her or anything, but there's a fire in the house and she can't get down the stairs. So she jumps out the window to escape, and they're still there. But by this point, there's 911's been called. Lights are coming on around the neighborhood from all the 5 people that called 911 and saw this happening. Perhaps even the fire truck's on its way now. And as from being up there, like you would have seen those coming miles away, literally. So now they've got Becky. They get her, they kill her. And one thing I hadn't thought of before because I hadn't thought of this scenario was because I said it doesn't make sense that they didn't just put her back in the house because the fire wasn't so out of control. Because Tim Summerly says he looked through the garage and through the door and there's no fire there. But if they were in the backyard and Becky comes out the window and is in the backyard, the people if the killers are in the backyard, they couldn't see through that door in the garage and know there was a place where they could have tossed her in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the investigation, if you look through the old crime scene photos, you'll see where I'm kind of going with this. But the first thing you do in a fire investigation is you start outside and work your way in. You can tell by looking at the house damage where the fire started and where it was the most intense. And what you'll see is the west side of the house, the northwest corner of the house, has the most damage.
Mm-hmm.
That's where so the part they were seeing. And Tim said, I could only see, he couldn't even see the front of the house because of the pine trees. He only saw through that one door. And he said he saw there was a light, but it wasn't flicked. I think it's because the back of the house was ripping in flames.
Yeah.
I think there's a good possibility that John and Vicky were upstairs when the fire started, either moved up there or that's where they were killed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll get into all that later.
But no smoke in anyone's lungs. Well, we don't know about John and Vicky, but
yeah, no, I think there wasn't in their lungs, but
oh,
we know
they
were
could.
shot. They were
Right.
killed before the fire was started.
Right.
As far as
but no
Becky,
smoke in Becky's lungs. Great point, Montana. Great point. Great question.
Yeah, well, and we'll have to go back to the autopsy because I think they said there maybe was some indication that there was she had breathed in some, but that makes sense. If there was so much smoke in her lungs that she died, or she would have died with the modern building construction.
Yeah, I guess that's what my question would be, and I'm so glad you brought this up, Montana. Is just like how much smoke do you have to inhale before it shows up in your lungs in an autopsy? Because I don't.
Yeah, quite a bit. Because what you're looking for is not smoke. You're looking for signs of burning in the lungs and stuff.
I see.
And carbon deposits in there. So if she was opens the door, there's a bunch of smoke and fire, closes the door and goes out. That makes perfect sense. Okay. But if she goes out and then they catch her, everybody's coming. The house from that perspective in the backyard is way too engulfed to do anything to move to put her back in. Then they kill her. I think there's a struggle. The fact that her hands are burned as bad as they are, I'm thinking they poured gasoline directly on her hands because she probably clawed them. They put her in the wheelbarrow and they light her on fire and they get out of there. They take off on foot because everyone's alerted to what's going on right now. But by that point, that is the first scenario I've come up with that makes the most sense to me as to why, because I've never been able to understand why Becky's body wasn't in the house. Mm-hmm. At the event, when we had Jim come up and talk through some of those things, is he said, as he's kind of taken all this in, that it looks to him as though you don't have a triple homicide, you have a double homicide and a witness that was killed. And back at the beginning when we didn't know as much, he thought, like he said, is bifurcated. Maybe Vicky's the target, maybe Becky's the target. She's definitely treated differently. That made sense to him. And as he thought it through on the spot, that's when he said, you're right. If Becky was killed first, then she would have been found inside the house. And I think that makes the most logical sense. There's some version of events that may, there's certainly things that could be changed there that happen differently. I could be totally wrong, but right now that's the theory that I'm leaning towards, that she was inside the house the whole time. And one of the things I was searching for was pictures of the damn phone line to see if it was cut.
Yeah.
You know,
And
could
that's not something you can tell on the phone company side. Like they wouldn't know. They wouldn't be able to say there's a lack of activity and we can tell it's because the phone line was cut.
What got me thinking about it is people said, I think Javier said that they kept calling and kept getting a busy signal.
Hmm.
And I need to do a little more research on that, but I wonder if, you know, cutting them, that's shorting
That's
out
really
those
interesting.
wires.
Yeah, I would love to know more about that.
Because if they just weren't answering the phone,
yeah,
then it would just ring and ring and ring and ring, but they were getting a busy signal.
Right.
So that's interesting. So all things that we're going to look at as we go forward, but as your final thing of the year, after all these months of doing it, I think that's a plausible theory. Jim thought it was a plausible theory.
It's really interesting. And just to be clear, that's Patrick's theory, not yours.
Right, Patrick's theory.
Shout out to Patrick.
Yeah, but you know it.
No, when he said that on the scene, I got chills. I think Shiloh said she got chills. I think we were all like, "Oh shit!"
For the first time, the scene all made sense for the first
Yeah.
time, and then Jim was able to do what Jim does and break through. And we're like, you're right. I wasn't able to articulate it that well, but it was just like there was a clear murder, then burn the house down plan. But Becky doesn't fit with that plan. Why wouldn't she be back in the house? That little nugget that came from Patrick all of a sudden brings everything together. It makes sense. And
it's really interesting.
It is now, it doesn't mean that's what happened, but it is supported by the evidence and the fact that there's no substantial DNA on the wheelbarrow handles looking like someone pushed the wheelbarrow, but there's DNA on Becky's body. Adds up.
Right. That's really interesting. It's a theory. We'll see how it develops. We'll see how it gets proven or disproven or neither, but it's a lot to chew on. And this has been such a great follow-up. Again, I do blame our listeners for having amazing questions and making this so long. It's your fault. You guys are amazing.
Yeah, I'll take some blame for rambling. I mean, there was a solid 40 minutes of me just talking without questions.
I think Kelly will cut that out. Kelly's going to cut that out. Snip. Yep.
Yeah. And with that, Janet, as we wrap up the year, I think Jack over here.
Jack and Zanet.
Jack and Zanet.
Together at last.
Zach and I both share the sentiment that it's been a wonderful year. You've been amazing, and we appreciate you so much for taking over for Mike when he left.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Okay, tell her something mean.
Janet, we love you.
Yeah, we love you
guys.
Yeah, and we love all of you listeners, and thank you guys for hanging out through this. Hope you all have a great holiday weekend for those of you that celebrate holidays, or just a great weekend if you don't.
Everybody stay safe if you're traveling. Be safe. I say that because of the weather. As much as
an improviser, professional improviser.
Go fuck yourself.
Happy holidays, everyone. And we'll be back on January 1st.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye, guys.
You can stop your recording.
And Janet's last words on the podcast were go fuck yourself.
Sweet, kind Janet Marnie says go fuck yourself.
Don't you touch my improv skills, Bob. Once you start messing with my improv skills, the claws come out.
It's so funny. Look, here's the improviser. And be safe, I guess. All of you on YouTube, thank you guys so much for participating. This is another new thing we've been doing this year, and you guys have been great, and we really appreciate it. And don't forget, if you're just on here and you want to see the full hour of this nonsense that goes on before you guys join us, that is on the Patreon. There's your shameless plug.
Nice.
On the Patreon, so you can check all that out along with ad-free episodes. And with that, we're going to stop this last 2022 live stream.